Casanova's Life and Lovers. One name in history has become a byword for a great lover, Casanova. But who was the man attached to the legend? What sexual misadventures did he get up to as he traveled the courts of 18th century Europe? Did he do anything else besides shag? And what did the many women and men he took to bed get out of the encounter? Let's get intimate with Giacomo Casanova and his many lovers. Giacomo Girolamo Casanova was born in Venice, modern-day Italy, on April 2, 1725, the eldest child of a pair of actors. At the time, theater performers often moonlighted as sex workers to the aristocratic audience. Though Gaetano gave his name to Zenada's 6 children, their biological paternity was rather dubious. Their grandmother raised them while the parents toured Europe. Giacomo was a sickly child and suffered frequent nosebleeds. In search of a cure, his grandmother took him to see a witch. He was fascinated by the woman's 6 black cats and incantations, though he was not cured. When he was 8, his father died of an ear abscess. On his 9th birthday, he was sent to live in a boarding house in Padua. A doctor had convinced his grandmother that the dry mainland air would cure him, but young Giacomo felt abandoned. He had received very little education, but soon proved to be exceedingly bright with a thirst for knowledge. His tutor, Gozzi, moved him out of the flea-infested boarding house and into his own home. 11-year-old Giacomo became infatuated with Gozzi's sister, Bettina, who was in her late teens. While giving him a bath, she fondled him. Today, we would consider this child abuse, but Giacomo thought of it as the moment his lifelong passions were awoken. He was dismayed when Bettina married an older man, but they remained friends for the rest of their lives. At 12, he visited his mother in Venice. During dinner, Giacomo successfully translated a vulgar Latin riddle and gave a witty response. Zenada was so impressed that she began to take an interest in her son. Basking in this rare maternal attention, Giacomo learned that he could use his wits to gain admiration. At 12, the child prodigy was sent to the University of Padua. Gozzi pushed him towards a degree in ecclesiastical law, a subject he hated. He much preferred medicine and studied it in his spare time. At 15, he was appointed a trainee priest and put to work in the house of Father Tostello. There he met the priest's 17-year-old niece, Angela. The pair had strong feelings for one another, and she asked Giacomo to abandon his career in the priesthood and marry her, but he really just wanted to get into her chemise. He got more of the kind of attention he was craving from Angela's 2 friends, sisters Nanetta and Morton Sovignana. He lost his virginity to the sisters in a menage a trois. Giacomo needed a large income to pay off the gambling debts he had racked up at university. His mother introduced him to 76-year-old Senator Malipiero, who became his patron. He taught the young man how to be a gentleman. Tall, dark, and handsome, Giacomo now moved in the top circles of society. In the 18th century, Venice was the party and pleasure capital of Europe. The independent republic was ruled by political and religious conservatives who tolerated vice as it encouraged lucrative tourism. The City of Canals was a required stop on the Grand Tour, the route traveled by wealthy men coming of age. The upper crust, particularly British aristocrats, flocked to Venice's casinos, theaters, and brothels to sow their wild oats before returning home to settle down. Carnival was a particularly hedonistic time. Revelers hid their identities under elaborate masks, and anonymity freed them to engage in all brands of pleasure and debauchery. It was not unusual to see people having sex in public, or gambling their fine clothes away and strolling home naked. Carnival always ended at Lent in March. But just as Halloween decorations now pop up for sale in July, the start date kept creeping backwards. Before long, it was launched in October with a short break for Christmas, leading to almost 6 months of wild tourist-drawing celebration. Casanova, with his burgeoning attraction to all things sensual, was born for this time and place. He was a dandy and wore the latest styles, with his long hair powdered, scented, and elaborately curled. One night, Father Tostello, who did not approve of his young charge's peacocking, snuck into his room while he was asleep and cut off his hair. Senator Malipiero was so perturbed that he arranged for his protege to take the priest's place at the pulpit on Sunday. Giacomo's charisma soon drew crowds. But one Saturday, he enjoyed a raging night on the town and was in very rough shape in front of the congregation on Sunday morning. Rather than stumble through his sermon, he pretended to faint. Senator Malipiero had fallen head over heels for an operatic soprano, Teresa Emir. One day, the senator woke up early from a nap and walked in on his protege in flagrante delicto with Teresa. Malipiero struck Giacomo with his walking stick and threw him out. Having shat where he ate, Casanova was in need of a new job. His mother asked her own patron, Augustus III of Saxony, King of Poland, to secure him a place in a seminary. Zenata excitedly wrote that he would be a bishop in 20 years. He answered that he might even become pope, an occupation which did not necessarily exclude an active sex life. But when Giacomo was caught in bed with another young priest, he was expelled from the seminary and imprisoned. There he made the acquaintance of the Greek wife of a lieutenant who begged him to write letters on her husband's behalf. She paid him in sexual favors and threw in gonorrhea for free. Now 18, Giacomo headed to the west coast for a fresh start. While on a ship to Rome, he met a married woman, Donna Lucrezia. In Rome, he found a position as a scribe for the powerful Cardinal Acquaviva. But soon Lucrezia became pregnant, and when the scandal broke, the cardinal gave Casanova the sack, ending his career in the church. For his next trick, he purchased a commission as an officer in the Venetian military. His priority was to look the part. His tailor made a stunning white and blue uniform with silver and gold shoulder knots, and of course, a long sword. He joined a regiment in Corfu and was sent on a mission to Constantinople. On the way, he came across a family of traveling performers. He had a liaison with the two daughters, but was truly captivated by the brother, Bellino. He was a castrato. Because women were banned from performing in ecclesiastical choirs, it had become common for talented boy singers to be castrated to preserve their ethereal voices. Giacomo pursued Bellino, but when he finally got him into the sack, he discovered that he was in fact a woman posing as a castrato. He continued the affair with his own Victor Victoria, whose name was Teresa Lanti, and he encouraged her to perform openly as a woman. A few months after he moved on, she gave birth to a son. She went on to become a famous female opera singer. Casanova finally arrived at the Sultan's court and made friends, including a wealthy man who offered him his 15-year-old daughter in marriage. Giacomo seriously considered it, but decided not to convert to Islam. An aristocrat named Ishmael invited him to watch 3 of his female servants bathing in a pool. Then Giacomo and Ishmael had a sexual encounter in order to extinguish the flames ignited by the 3 sirens. Finding Constantinople enticingly exotic, but its beautiful women sexually unavailable, he returned to Italy. He grew bored of the army and sold his commission to a man who was perhaps better suited for a soldiering life. Now 21 and having failed at 2 professions, Casanova decided to become a professional gambler. That lasted a few weeks until he lost all of his military pay. Career number 4 was as a violinist. He soon acquired all the habits of his degraded fellow musicians. When they weren't chasing women, they wandered the city at night, playing practical jokes like untying expensive gondolas and letting them drift away, or calling midwives and physicians on false alarms. One evening after attending a wedding ball, Casanova was riding in a gondola with wealthy Count Matteo Bragadin when the older man suffered a stroke. Giacomo rushed him to a doctor who applied the standard treatment for a heart attack of bleeding and mercury ointment on the chest. Bragadin overheated and choked out that he needed a priest to give him last rites. Giacomo, whom you will recall had studied medicine, pushed the doctor aside and washed off the toxic ointment. He personally nursed Bragadin, who soon made a full recovery. The Count was fascinated by all things mysticism, and he was sure that his young savior must have knowledge of the occult. He invited Giacomo to move in with him and adopted him as his son. The Count and his friends were all longtime bachelors, and there were rumors that he and his protege were lovers. Casanova once again wore the finest clothes to the most lavish parties and pursued the loveliest ladies. He has a reputation as a heedless seducer, but the women he went to bed with were exceedingly willing participants. And it wasn't just his looks and charisma that drew them like moths to a flame. In a time when women were viewed as property, to be used and abused for men's pleasure and reproduction, Giacomo held the unique view that women were his equals. He was just as interested in their brains as their bodies. And once he got them into the sack, he cared about their enjoyment. He wrote that seeing a woman's pleasure made up 4/5 of his own. But he understood himself well enough to know that he was not built for lasting intimacy. His MO was to valiantly rescue a woman in an unhappy relationship, spend a few blissful months infatuated with her, and then give the lady the old "it's not you, it's me" by declaring himself unworthy and moving on before things got stale. He regularly nursed his broken heart in the brothel and picked up the odd STI. Casanova was one of the first proponents of condom use. In the 18th century, prophylactics were made from animal intestine and were washed out and reused. He tested his love glove for damage before each use by blowing it up like a balloon. He then tied it on with a blue ribbon. Casanova's patron was exceedingly tolerant, but warned him that his hedonism would one day come back to bite him in the ass. As part of a practical joke on an enemy, he dug up a freshly buried corpse, but he so frightened the man that he went into paralysis and never recovered, and a young woman accused him of rape. He was acquitted of both crimes on lack of evidence, but he was no longer welcome in Venice and fled to Parma, where he met a French woman named Henriette, who was escaping an abusive marriage. Their 3-month affair was perhaps the most meaningful of his life. He wrote of her, "They who believe that a woman is incapable of making a man equally happy all 24 hours of the day has never known an Henriette. The joy which flooded my soul was far greater when I conversed with her during the day than when I held her in my arms at night." Having read a great deal and having natural taste, Henriette judged rightly of everything. She also judged Casanova astutely and decided that tying her life to his would be unwise. She slipped out of their hotel room in the early hours. She used a diamond to etch in the window, "You will forget Henriette," but he never did. Wherever he went, Casanova's reputation as a legendary lover preceded him. In Lyon, he joined the Freemasons. He spent 2 years in Paris, perfecting his French and living the high life. While attending a party, he found himself alone with an elderly duchess. She began undoing the buttons on his breeches. Shocked, he sputtered out that he had gonorrhea and quickly excused himself. A wealthy young duchess called on him for his reputation as a healer. She was a beauty but had developed a rash on her face. Giacomo advised her to wash her skin with clean water and avoid cosmetics. The cure worked, and naturally they had a fling. While attending the theater with Madame de Pompadour, the mistress of Louis XV, she inquired whether he was really from down there in Venice. He replied, "Venice, madame, is up." Then he and Cardinal de Bernis were discussing which of the actresses on stage they preferred. The cardinal commented that Casanova's choice had ugly legs, to which Giacomo replied, "In assessing a woman's beauty, the first thing I always put aside are her legs." While making witty remarks increased his notoriety, it didn't pay the bills. His younger brother, Francisco, had been trained as a painter, and Giacomo invited him to Paris, where he planned to introduce him to rich patrons. But when Francisco's battle painting was criticized at the Louvre, he was humiliated. Giacomo had been hit with a lawsuit by his landlady who claimed that he had impregnated her daughter, so the brothers quit the City of Lights and headed to Dresden, where their mother made introductions. There, Giacomo wrote a play, which was performed for King Augustus and well received. He also visited Prague and Vienna, but found the Holy Roman Empire's morality stifling. He returned to Venice and resumed his usual escapades. He came across an overturned carriage, and when he got a look at the passenger's overturned skirts, he began pursuing her. During the Carnival season, he purchased a box at the theater and frequently invited Caterina Capretta. Her brother and chaperone, Pietro, was hoping to sell her virginity. But Giacomo was in love and refused to pay. Caterina returned his feelings, and the pair plotted to get her pregnant to secure a dowry from her wealthy father. The father refused and sent Caterina to a convent. Despite his love for her, Giacomo also rekindled a relationship with Teresa Emir. She gave birth to a daughter. Casanova was distraught to learn that Caterina had miscarried. He received a letter from an older nun, known only as M.M., who invited him to meet her near the convent. They spent the winter betwixt the sheets, and in the spring, Caterina joined them in a ménage à trois. Misadventures with nuns were just another thing added to Casanova's extensive rap sheet with the Venice Inquisition. At the age of 30, he was arrested and locked up, without trial in the Doge's palace. He spent 9 months in a flea-infested cell, not knowing how long his sentence was or if he would be executed in the morning. During a walk, he found a piece of marble and an iron bar, which he smuggled back to his cell. For 2 weeks, he sharpened the bar on the marble, then gouged through the wooden floor of his cell. The day before he planned to escape, his patron, the Count, managed to get him moved to a larger cell with a window. Frustrated, Giacomo protested that he liked his small cell just fine, but the confused jailers moved him anyway. After a few days of moping, he struck up a friendship with the inmate in his old cell and convinced him to use the marble and bar to break through the ceilings of both of their cells. The men climbed onto the roof during a dense fog. They brought a bedsheet rope, but the drop to the street was too far to survive. They jumped across roofs until they were able to break into the window of a grand ballroom, but the doors were all locked. There had clearly been a fabulous party there earlier that evening. As dawn broke, Casanova banged on the door and convinced the guards that he was a wealthy reveler who had been accidentally locked into the ballroom after the party. Terrified of getting in trouble, the guards let him out the front door. Casanova fled to Paris, where a fellow gambler told him about his plan to start the first ever lottery. Giacomo thought it was a brilliant idea and passed it off as his own. The scheme was a huge success and made him a fortune. He became infatuated with Manon Meletti, a 17-year-old noblewoman. When her mother was on her deathbed, she asked Casanova to marry Manon, and he promised to do so. But he kept finding excuses to put off his walk down the aisle. Manon ran out of patience and married someone else. One night, Casanova shared a carriage with the Comte de la Tour, and they had a sex worker sitting on their laps. In the darkness, Casanova reached for the lady's hand and guided it to his crotch. Just as things were coming to their conclusion, the Comte spoke up. "I'm obliged to you, my dear friend, for this curious and unexpected Italian handshake, a greeting I was neither expecting nor deserving of," and burst out laughing. The men became friends, and when the Comte fell ill with sciatica, Casanova cured him. He soon had plenty of wealthy clients who came to him for herbs and numerology. He became Marquise Jean de Fay's personal alchemist and promised to make the aging lady a philosopher's stone to allow her to live forever. Casanova was, by his own admission, a con artist, writing, "Deceiving a fool is an exploit worthy of an intelligent man." He dabbled in yet another career as a spy. He was sent on a mission to Amsterdam to collect intelligence during the 7 Years' War. There he became reacquainted with his old lover, Teresa Emir. He offered to take custody of their 5-year-old daughter, Sophie. She refused, but offered her 12-year-old son, Giuseppe, instead. Casanova convinced the Marquise to adopt the boy, with the hopes of transfusing her own soul into his young body. He also tried and failed to conceive a child with 2 different women while Jeanne watched. Then he tried to make Jeanne herself pregnant, promising that she would die in childbirth, but her soul would be born into her child. She failed to conceive in her late 50s and was finally persuaded that Casanova's immortality schemes were bunk. He had spent his own fortune on good times and women and was thrown into debtor's prison. The Marquise got him released, then washed her hands of him. He secured another spy mission to Holland, then traveled on to Germany, Switzerland, and Italy, using the bogus noble title Chevalier de Saint-Gall, an anagram for genitals. He became friends with famed philosophers Voltaire and Rousseau. Pope Clement VIII presented him with the Papal Order of the Golden Spur. But while feeling wary of his wanton life, he visited a monastery and considered becoming a monk. He returned to his hotel to think it over, immediately saw a beautiful woman, and forgot all about the religious life. In Naples, he met 17-year-old Leonilda. He abandoned his attempts to seduce her when he met her mother, Anna Maria Velati, whom he'd had an affair with some 18 years earlier. While an incestuous relationship with his daughter was a step too far, he did reconnect with the mother. 38-year-old Giacomo was invited to London by Teresa Emir, who was running a private club for aristocrats. He returned to her son, Giuseppe, sans the Marquise's soul, but plus a packet of pilfered jewels. At Teresa's parties, he struggled with English and had trouble connecting intellectually with the ladies. He took out a newspaper ad looking to rent rooms in his fashionable Pall Mall flat to a woman who spoke a Romance tongue, and offered a discount on the rent for certain benefits. Several ladies applied to the 18th century Craigslist ad, and Paulina from Portugal lived happily with him for a few months. He managed an audience with George III, but was unable to sell his lottery scheme to the frugal king. He met courtesan Marie Chapon, who was unhappy with her lover. She persuaded Casanova to rescue her and set her up in an apartment, but she kept putting off sex, while extorting money and gifts from him. He had never yet experienced being turned down by a woman. After yet another rejection, he flew into a rage and threatened her, then quickly repented. Marie reported him to the authorities, and he was arrested for assault and taken to Newgate Prison. He managed to persuade the judge to release him, and exacted revenge by training a parrot to squawk, "Mademoiselle Chapillon is a whore." Then he set it free outside the London Exchange. This scandal, plus a bout of venereal disease, soured his taste for England. In Berlin, King Frederick the Great of Prussia called his lottery a swindle. In St. Petersburg, he purchased a serf girl from her father for 100 rubles and made her his mistress. At a party under Russia's midnight summer sun, he met Catherine the Great. She was 34 and had just taken the throne from her husband. When 2 of history's most famous lovers met, they did not feel chemistry. Instead, they discussed music and the Gregorian calendar. Casanova left Russia without selling his lottery scheme. Catherine did write an introduction to King Stanislav II August, her former lover whom she had made King of Poland. But when Casanova was wounded in a duel over an actress, he was expelled from Warsaw. He retreated to Provence, where doctors wanted to amputate his wounded hand, but he refused. Sick with fever and possibly syphilis, a woman appeared at his door in his hour of need. She was the housekeeper of the love of his life, Henriette, who lived in the area. The housekeeper nursed him back to health. Then he went to call on his old flame. Instead, Henriette sent him a letter, saying that they had seen each other at a ball, but he had failed to recognize her as they had both aged considerably. They never met in person, but continued to exchange letters. Casanova made one last attempt to restore his fortune. He gained an audience with King Carlos III of Spain, but again his lottery was rejected. In his later years, Casanova's sexual encounters were a lot more problematic. On a carriage ride back to Italy, he met an English teenager named Betty, who was a boarding school friend of his own daughter, Sophie. He seduced her, but in public they claimed to be father and daughter. In Naples, he visited Anna Maria Velati and their daughter, Leonilda. She was now in her 20s and married to a rich elderly aristocrat. Anna Maria informed him that Leonilda's husband was incapable of giving her a child, and she asked Giacomo to remedy the situation. He obliged, and Leonilda conceived. In Rome, he met up with an old friend who got him access to young nuns. Casanova longed to return to his native Venice. He ingratiated himself with the Inquisition by engaging in espionage. Finally, he was granted permission to return after 18 years in exile. He re-entered the city of his birth as a celebrity. He reconnected with old lovers, Angela Toselli and Caterina Capretta. But at 49, decades of hard living had caught up with him. He was pockmarked, sunken-cheeked, and ill-tempered, and beautiful women no longer fell down before him. And as always, he was broke. To raise cash, he wrote a Lady Whistledown-style gossip rag. But he went too far by claiming to be the secret son of a nobleman and discrediting his heir. He was chased out of Venice once more. He went to visit his first crush, Bettina Gozzi, and she died in his arms. On a final visit to Paris, he met American Ambassador Benjamin Franklin, with whom he discussed aviation and the future of balloon transportation. Desperate, he took a position as a librarian to Count Josef Karl von Waldstein at the Castle Dux near Prague. He found life there deadly dull. He threw hissy fits when his indulgent employer failed to show him off to important visitors. He rejected his fellow low-born servants, and his only companions were his fox terriers. He saved his meager pay for occasional trips to Prague to enjoy the charms of the city. There he met an old friend, who was the librettist to Mozart. Through him, Casanova made suggestions to the opera about famous lover Don Giovanni. Giacomo spent his ample free time writing. He penned a science fiction novel, which his friends advised him not to publish. And he labored over 4,000 pages of memoirs for 18 years. He used code names and initials to avoid embarrassing his sexual partners, and made veiled allusions to homosexual encounters. But he never published for fear that he would be viewed as despicable. In 1797, Napoleon Bonaparte conquered Venice, ending the 1,000-year-old republic. Casanova longed to see his birthplace one last time and planned a trip, but ill health prevented his departure. Giacomo died on June 4, 1798, at the age of 73, and was buried in Dux Castle. In 1812, his memoirs were published. In addition to being a titillating tale of sexual adventure, it is one of the finest records of all aspects of life during the 18th century. Many of his accounts have been corroborated, but we have to take his word on a number of the more intimate events. Giacomo was certainly not the only libertine prancing around the courts of Enlightenment Europe. In fact, his 120 recorded sexual partners pale in comparison to the likes of Lord Byron or anyone today with access to a dating app. But Giacomo Casanova's extensive, honest retelling of his misadventures and his unique, for the time, view of women as equals ensures that he will be remembered as one of the greatest lovers in history. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other history videos. You can also join my Patreon to support my work and get early access to all of my multi-part series. Thank you for watching.